I've got a feeling that this notion of can we find that one silver bullet or the one-size-fits-all solution is a very Western approach. It is this idea of, oh, we find the one thing we were going to do differently, the one innovation that's going to solve it all, and then we can lay back. But mostly it doesn't work that way because everything is embedded in bigger systems, in structures, in processes. So you got to understand those and then have a toolbox of different bullets, if we want to use that term, and say, which is the one that I need right now?
A lot of these questions that are being asked about the future of semiconductors are about what kind of new chips can we design, what kind of new technologies can be designed and deployed. However, a more fundamental question that should be asked before these technical solutions are being pursued is, what is that technology for? What are the social and environmental consequences of the use of that technology?
I don't think resilience exists without desire. What are we aiming for? What's worth our biggest effort? What's worth us spending time, resource, money, energy in our lives to build something? What is most desirable? That's the ideal. And I keep on hearing words they use like reimagine, rethink, reconnect. I'm like, I don't want to hear any more reimagine. I want to imagine. I want to rethink. No, I want to think. Stop it. I don't want to hear more anything. Start thinking, start imagining, start creating again. The future doesn't exist. The only thing that exists are many futures, and they're all in competition with each other all the time. There's no future yet. It's always being made. Whatever profession you're in, your job is to fight for the future that you believe in.
Semiconductor industry is super conservative and highly innovative at the same time. Super conservative because if you make too much changes at a time, your yield breaks down and the whole thing doesn't work. On the other side, if you don't heavily innovate, you will never have that performance improvement. So semiconductor industry always researched heavily. My name is Daniel Schall. I'm an electrical engineer and I am co-founder and CEO of Black Semiconductor. My first connection with engineering topics were pure interest and coincidence. There was just stuff lying around that I repaired. And then it turned out that it's even more fascinating for me how you make these circuits. And then the next question and the next question and the next question came, and I ended up with how do you make a computer chip? And then you find out about the problems with computer chips, and then you go, okay, well, maybe here's a solution. Let's see how far you can drive it. Semiconductor industry over the last decades improved performance by scaling. That's, of course, what will be continued, but it gets more and more complicated because structures are more condensed. They are smaller.
As long as we figure out ways of making things smaller, year by year by year, we can follow what was observed as called Moore's law. I prefer to call it Moore's observation because it's not necessarily a law.
More, faster, smaller, very simply for the last 50 years or even 60 years, Moore's law, double every 2 years, double every 2 years. We are potentially coming to a plateau.
Today we have a need for more innovation than we've ever had before. And the primary drivers on the information side is in artificial intelligence, known as AI, or machine learning, and data centers and data science technologies. Those technologies are consuming resources at rates that we have never seen in the history of mankind. So we have to find solutions to those.
I think every 20 years there's a device comes out that actually solidifies the semiconductor industry. It was laptops, then it became mobile phones, and then today, only 20 years later, after a mobile phone has proliferated our economies, we're now into AI, and that's the next thing that's going to solidify us for about 10 to 15 years. And we're seeing all sorts of offshoots, and it's developing into this really big economy, but also it's now starting to drive other economies because we're at the point of AI driving everything.
The models are very big, they have billions of parameters, and that's why you need many processors to compute that problem. And if the problem that has to be solved is so huge that one chip cannot compute it in a reasonable amount of time, you have to use multiple chips. At some point, the problem is so big that you have to use thousands and 10,000s of chips. And if you start to stack chips on top of each other, you have a heat problem. Sooner or later, they capture all the heat and cease to work. And that's why the only way forward is lateral, so you have to put chips side by side. And this is where our innovation can help. The main idea of Black Semiconductor is to combine electronics and photonics. Electronics is very good for logic computation, and optics is very good for data transport. We combine both. An electrical connection at a very high speed only works over very few millimeters or maybe centimeters. And that's not the reality today in a system where thousands of chips have to be connected. The idea was to push beyond the limits that current technology has, or to find an alternative. And then graphene emerged. It's a very lousy material for logic electronics, but it turned out to be a fantastic optical material, so graphene can contribute to connect chips.
By accident, we found out that graphene is such a wonderful material to translate electrical signals into light signals and read that back. This is a wonderful example of what innovation can be. I think the industry will really try to scale until the last electron is squeezed out. We do not need to interfere with that. What we try to bring is a novel mean to allow to rethink systems. What you can do on one chip is not enough. So you need to try to build up systems that consist of multiple chips, and they have to almost seamlessly working together as one system.
We add a photonic functionality onto an existing chip, so you don't need to change the existing chip. You get something new on top. The benefit of that photonic layer is that you can start to connect chips over a distance that is longer than electrical connections can do.
We want to make things more efficient, we want to make things faster, and this is at the end what we are also doing. We are offering a solution to build bigger systems because bigger systems can handle large data sets more efficiently. 1 + 1 is more than 2 here. And this is where we want to go.
Even though these devices are being made and being pushed out and incorporated into our lives, they all require power. So we've completely forgotten about that element of the supply chain. So that will raise its head in about, I think, my opinion, 5 to 6 years. We're going to see a problem then with the supply of the power units, the battery. So we got to look at the complete end-to-end ecosystem. And I don't think we're thinking far enough outside the box there. We're still in the whack-a-mole strategy.
We use a lot of semiconductors and chips, both in our particle detectors and in the computing systems, because we collect such massive amounts of data. And so with all that computing and storage needs, we also have a high demand on energy consumption.
We can have all the technology in the world, we can have all of the innovation in the world, but if we don't have access to these fundamental resources of water and energy, we're going to have a huge, huge, huge problem.
We do know, essentially, that energy is the basis of everything. And then we're looking at transmitting devices, which is where semiconductors come into play. And then we're thinking about how can we use least energy to stay within what we call the planetary boundaries and avoid climate change, etc. A renewable energy system is much more distributed, needs to integrate different sources of energy in a reliable way. It wouldn't work without what we call digitalization and information spread and smart grids, etc.
Currently, we can only put on about 15 to 25% of renewable sources on a particular power grid because the variability of those sources means that we could have brownouts. It's not a big deal for your home to have your lights kind of dim for a moment or something like that, but it's an enormous problem for a motor running in a factory to have a fluctuation in voltage. That can destroy the infrastructure of that factory. So power stability is important. And since we can only put 15 to 25% renewables on the grid at the present time, we really have to be reliant on traditional sources of power, whether that be nuclear power or coal, natural gas, or other fossil fuel sources. My name is William Allen Doolittle. I go by my middle name, Allen Doolittle, and I'm a Pettit Professor of Electrical and Computer Engineering. In a broad sense, what I do is develop new semiconductor materials that we can use for applications that are far beyond what we can do today. My father is the best natural engineer that I've ever seen, and he didn't have any formal training in engineering, but he could just figure out ways to make things work. Growing up, I was almost every weekend working on cars with my father. We were not very well off, and so we weren't working on ours, we were working on other people's cars. And that led me to a desire to build things better, to actually engineer solutions. I kind of stumbled into semiconductor research. I went to a lecture on solar cells. Solar cells are just a semiconductor device that converts sunlight into electrical power. I talked to the professor afterwards, and I told him I was interested actually at the time in optics. I mentioned that to him, and he indicated, oh yes, you could do that for me. And I was a little naive and signed up to grad school to do optical computing with this professor who was a solar cell person and ended up doing solar cells. It was the best stumble, best piece of luck that you could ever have in your career. One of the universal truths about electrical and computer engineering is power transmission is best done at high voltages. This is why we have very high voltages in our utility grids, for example, to transmit power. We're working with a material called aluminum nitride. Basically, this semiconductor material can handle enormous power, enormous voltage. What we'll be able to do is greatly amplify the amount of renewable energy we can put on a grid. But also, you'll be able to redirect power in what we call a smart grid utility application. And therefore, fluctuations won't matter. If one particular city is low in power because a cloud is over it or the wind is not blowing in that area, we can redirect power from another location that's generating power and satisfy the needs for power universally. Really, for the first time ever, we'll be able to have electronic steering, if you will, directing power across a grid, real time, as a response to the massive changes that you might have in renewable energy sources. And it would be enabled by the ability to have a semiconductor that can rapidly switch large power, large voltages across the utility grid. We anticipate that aluminum nitride devices will start to come to market in 3 to 5 years with all of the engineering challenges well in hand. All that we really need to do is to improve the repeatability of the process and overcome certain challenges that we know how to tackle. It just takes time and money to do.
So the collaboration aspect of the industry of semiconductors is multinational, it's global. And it's great that there are such engineers out there that are actually pushing the boundaries and looking at new chemicals and new substrates and new materials. But I think going forward, that could be under threat. As people start building silos in terms of knowledge sharing, people sharing, and just general sharing of ideas. So I think that is a challenge that we're going to have to overcome in the future.
So the United States and this culture is built on that diversity of talent and those diversity of perspectives. People from India, Ghana, China, Japan, the immigration in this country was a force multiplier. So I'm concerned about the xenophobia that seems to be entering the culture. It's a reaction to a fear of the future, because the opposing party has not painted a better view of the future. So we don't know where we're going. And when someone doesn't have a good idea of the future, they will go backwards.
As a society, we need to start thinking of where do we want to be? Really have a clear vision of what we want to achieve. And currently that is actually probably very difficult. There's a lot of polarization on the political spectrum and the environmental spectrum. Consensus is going to be very hard to achieve. But if we have a vision of what a good, resilient society looks like in 10, 20, 30 years, we can start designing around that.
So I often see these kinds of discussions where one asks, what is the solution? Singular, right? It seems like there is some kind of one-size-fits-all solutions. But I think the very idea of a networked world, the very embodiment of a supply chain reveals that these are all products of systems that are interconnected. And one cannot localize the problem. And one cannot just have a localized solution to something that is interconnected.
In a lot of cases where we're talking out the best solutions, we have to move from a product point of view to an infrastructure point of view. When we think about what's happening right now, we're really reorganizing the infrastructures of the future, be it our energy systems, be it our mobility systems, be it our communication infrastructure. And all of that is being driven by digital innovation, but also by the understanding that the old ways we've organized them are unsustainable. But we don't see that anywhere in our democracies that are really short-termed. You have to find something that your electorate likes, and a lot of the decisions that you would have to take that are structurally changing will play out also in a positive way only in the midterm.
China's fascinating. I've been there a lot. The scale of China is quite staggering, not only in terms of the physical scale, but the scale of time. The culture thinks in generations, not in decades. They think in terms of generations. So their perspective is powerful and long-term. They're making investments now for the 22nd century. That's the way they think. We think in terms of election cycles.
In my opinion, we have to change the approach to how government and the semiconductor industry interact. Historically, the Western world has separated the businesses from the government in the form of semiconductor businesses. What we're finding with the more Eastern models that have been much more successful is there's been a greater intertwining of government and business in the semiconductor model because of the scale of the problems that we're facing, particularly financial scales of the problem.
We really need to move away from this status quo that we have in mind. Yes, it's going to be expensive. Yes, it's going to be hard, but it's kind of like the idea pay now or pay later. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Do you want to pay this cost now, or do you want to pay the cost even further down the line?
I think innovation is just a part of humankind. People are curious, they want to understand things, and they want to do something with that understanding. You look to problems, you start to understand them, and because you understand them, you can start to address them.
Once one person makes a breakthrough on something, everybody else then is going, I never thought about that. And then suddenly they can develop, and it literally becomes like a snowball. And this snowballing grows and grows and grows, and then the more people that see it, suddenly we have a brand new product that just came out of nowhere.
Every technological development is pre-constructed in your mind. So you're actually envisioning where you want to go, and you're imagining a purpose, you're imagining an outcome, and you're imagining some key performance indicators for that outcome. And when we see what are the key performance indicators right now, it is either making a lot of money or being dominant in a particular sphere. And that is not necessarily serving what we would say are good outcomes for progressive societies, like more well-being, more health, ecological stability.
And so I think that is probably the starting point when we think about resilience on a planetary level in terms of our species and the future of this planet, the environment, the ecosystems, that we really need to have a more capacious understanding about what we as a species actually value. And that is reflected in the supply chains. And so when it comes to semiconductors, a highly monopolized industry, for it to become more resilient is for it to become more egalitarian. So how can we better distribute the knowledge and the know-how so that semiconductors not only benefits the most powerful governments and the richest companies, but it's something that actually benefits humanity.
Education is the great equalizer. Students come and go from country to country and learn skills. They contribute to the local economies, oftentimes getting jobs locally, but they also go back to their home countries and contribute there. And most universities have been working on the model that I think should be expanded to this industry, and that is diversity of beliefs and understanding and diversity of experiences all coming together. And when you get that mix in there, I can guarantee you there's not a problem in this world that a really smart, educated student will not eventually solve.